Hello, everybody. My name is Bosrudan, a.k.a. El Guapo, and it's me speaking to you with your host, Jeffrey Wilson.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, locked and loaded once again, another episode of It's Me Speaking to You, ever faithfully your host, Mr. Jeffrey Wilson, coming to you live and direct from the Gateway to the West, the It's Me Speaking to You studios. My goodness, to say I'm stoked will be an understatement. I get to talk to him yet once again. This guy is my hero. I've heard his voice, and you've heard his voice too everywhere, ladies and gentlemen. This guy has been doing it since Moby Dick was a minnow, I believe. He's done it for them all, man. Access TV, K1 Dream, King of the Cage, Lucha Underground, Maximum Fighting Championship. And the guys interviewed, some of my heroes, man, people I would love to pick their brain. You name it, man. Dana White, Vanderlei Silva, Hulk Hogan, George Foreman, Frank Dukes. Wow, I listened to that interview again today. Steven Seagal. Thank you again so much for taking the time, my friend, Mr. Michael Schiavello. The Voice, Mr. Scoop, is joining us today. How are you, sir?
Jeffrey, I'm good, mate. It's nice to be speaking to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are you're back in your homeland, back in Australia, correct?
Back in Australia, back down in Melbourne. Finished off a very busy year, half the year in the US, the other half of the year in Australia, and also travelling around Asia with one championship. But nice to be home and finished for the year and enjoying Christmas break.
Well, yeah, and you left us not too long ago. Obviously, people who don't know, he was once broadcasting for a while for the Access TV outfit and Legacy Fighting Championship with my homeboy, my partner in crime, and your former partner in crime, UFC Hall of Famer Pat Miletich. But you have moved on, like you said. You were down there. Man, I've been following this company too, man. One championship, a company out of Singapore. These guys are in 1 billion homes, ladies and gentlemen, in over 128 countries. What is that like, my friend?
It's crazy. It's intense. It's a lot of fun. It's a very, very high level of production. Probably the highest level of production I've ever been involved with, and these guys are just spot on. Everything they do is done to perfection. A lot of time is spent on the production values, and especially on the television side. As you said, broadcast to 128 countries and over 1 billion people. You've got to be spot on. And, they're broadcast everywhere from around Asia, the major markets like the Philippines and Malaysia and Singapore and Myanmar, over to Brazil and even Rwanda and the UK and just everywhere. So it's an amazing outfit to be a part of. And they really, they celebrate the martial arts in a way that I've never seen before.
Well, and obviously you are a huge fan, man. And like I talked to you, I sent you a message a little earlier before we went on. You are so, I think the word is fastidious. Your research is so on point, and you are such a huge fan of mixed martial arts as well as professional wrestling, which I am as well. Tell me, man, you go back, 21 years old, you get this job announcing for an outfit in Melbourne. You've done the Olympic Games, Fox Sports. When did the bug bite you, man? Because as a young man, you interviewed Pele, JYD, Diego Maradona. You really started off early. When did that bug bite you? Because like I said, as a professional wrestling fan, and almost piggybacking on that question, who are your influences as professional wrestling, etc.? When did it start for you, my friend?
Well, the story's an interesting one. I never wanted to be in media or broadcasting or anything like that. When I was growing up, Jeff, I always wanted to be an architect. That was my dream.
Oh, wow.
I used to love, drawing. I'd buy drawing magazines. I'd draw houses, and I really wanted to be an architect. I had my mind set on it. And then in Australia, when you go in year 10, I guess like junior high in America, I suppose, you get placed to work experience. So it's a week or 2 weeks. You right away to a company you might like, in an industry you might like to work for, and you go and do, volunteer work for them for a couple of weeks to give you an idea as to what the workforce is like and the job that you might like to do in a few years' time, what it might be like. So here I am as a 15, 16-year-old writing away to 20 architecture firms, and the freaky thing was that none of them wrote back. I didn't even get a no back. No one wrote back. I stood by the mailbox every day waiting for a letter to come back from, 20 firms saying, hey, we'll accept you to do a week's work experience in architecture, and no one wrote back. So it's getting close to the cutoff date, and I'm crying to my mum, going, Mum, what am I going to do? No one's written back. And out of nowhere, literally out of nowhere, my mum says to me, you've got a good voice. Why don't you do radio? I said, radio? I don't want to do radio. I haven't got a good voice. I want to be an architect. I want to be an architect. And Mum goes, listen, just humour me. Just right away to a radio station and just try and do radio. The journalists would be a fun sort of thing to do, I think. Just as long as they accept you, don't be a journalist that goes and covers any wars because you get blown up. So I'm like, all right. You know, Mum always knows best. So I wrote away to a radio station I listened to called Triple M. And weird thing was that within like a week and a half, Jeff, they wrote back a letter to me. Actually, it came on my birthday. I have it hanging up in my house to this day. April 10, 1990, I received a letter, my birthday, my 16th birthday, saying we accept you for work experience at Triple M Radio. So I went into the radio station, and this lady called Deanne Sloan is looking after me, and she looks me up and down, and she goes, what do you want to do in radio? I said, I don't. I want to be an architect. I'm just here because...
He's still fighting it.
Seriously. I said, I'm just here because, you know, my mum suggested it, and, you know, you guys accepted me. And she looked me up and down, and here I was wearing my denim jacket and a white shirt and a tie and denim pants, as you did back in 1990. And she said, I've got a good feeling about you, Michael. I'm going to put you in the newsroom with our journalists. So she puts me in this dingy little newsroom, but, man, I'll tell you what, it's like a light bulb switched on straight away. Within a minute of being around those buttons and microphones and in a studio in the newsroom, every ambition, every dream of becoming an architect went away, and all I wanted to do from that moment on was radio. So I started out doing radio, then I got into covering local sports for a local newspaper, and then that led into later on doing work for a magazine company where I was became Australia's youngest ever editor of like 9 sports and lifestyles magazines. And then when I was 21 years old, I got a gig working on Fox Sports, became Australia's youngest ever sports commentator, commentating the kickboxing and the Muay Thai on Fox Sports. And that was back in 96.
Yep.
And just it's gone from there ever since, you know, from there to K1 and
the Olympics. How was that? I mean that was pretty early on too, and that was obviously hugely monumental. What was that like?
Olympics was 2008 in Beijing, and it was crazy because I commentated, I think it was, if my memory serves me correct, 211 fights. And I did them all by myself. I didn't have a co-commentator. And I was commentating for the ABU, which is the global feed to all the Asian Broadcasting Union countries. So there was 118 countries that were taking our feed, everywhere from all parts of Africa, Thailand, Mauritius, just a lot of countries. And to do that many fights by yourself, when it's amateur boxing, there's not many knockouts. I think in that whole Olympic Games, I saw maybe 2 knockouts. It was long. It was, hard work, but it was very, very rewarding. And, you know, for any broadcaster, I think to broadcast the Olympic Games is like, that's the top of the mountain, you know?
Well, yeah, it's definitely a highlight for the resume, my man. And, you know, and again, I mean, you've been such a voracious fan of combat sports in general. Professional wrestling, you know, we're kind of in the same age range. It's funny when I talk to people about professional wrestling anymore, it literally starts a lot with late WWF, WWE Attitude Era. Very seldom do I meet people who really understand the territories, Crockett, NWA, et cetera, et cetera. When were you first exposed generally to professional wrestling and you know, what about it kind of appealed to you?
You know, this is another funny, it's strange what impact my mum has had on my career. This is another funny thing. So it's March 1985, and there's this thing called WrestleMania that's going to be broadcast on Australian television at like 8:30 at night on Channel 9, which is like, you know, one of the major networks, like being broadcast on, I suppose, you know, ABC in America. So Channel 9 at 8:30 on like a school night. And my mum says to me, she goes, hey, this WrestleMania thing is on tonight. You might enjoy it. Do you want to, I'll let you stay up for an hour and watch it after your bedtime, because bedtime was like 8:30. She goes, I'll let you start for an hour and we'll tape it. She bought a blank video, a blank VHS tape. She said, I'll tape it for you, but you can watch an hour. I'm like, all right, I'll watch it. 8:30
I'll watch it.
And, you know, here's this voice of this guy called Gorilla Monsoon welcoming me to the World Wrestling Federation and the biggest wrestling extravaganza of all time, WrestleMania, from Madison Square Garden. And I'm hooked straight away. And I remember watching one of the first matches was like this guy called King Kong Bundy, who was the scariest man I'd ever laid eyes on. He was just big, bad butterbean of a man who was said to be 400 plus pounds, taking on this ripped black guy called Special Delivery Jones.
SD.
And this guy, King Kong Bundy, what was I, 10 years old at the time, just rams Special Delivery Jones, beats him with an avalanche in 10 seconds. Are you kidding me?
I believe that record still holds to this day for the fastest pen.
I thought he killed him. And I remember after that match, there was a commercial break. And I remember going to the video recorder, rewinding it, and watching that 10 seconds of this guy, King Kong Bundy, beating Special Delivery Jones like 4 or 5 times before the broadcast came back on after commercial break. That was it, man. I was hooked after that. From WrestleMania 1 to WrestleMania 10 was really my love affair with pro wrestling. I loved Gorilla Monsoon. I loved Jesse Ventura. I loved Bobby the Brain Heenan. I loved Hulk Hogan. I was a Hulkamaniac. But I also loved Randy Savage, Macho Man, Ultimate Warrior, Blue Blazer, Big Boss Man, Ted DiBiase. These are the guys Ravishing Rick Rude. I grew up with these guys, that Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig. These are the guys that really fired my imagination from when I was, 10 years old to probably when I was 18, 19. And then later on, I'd switch over to WCW. I was a staunch WWF guy. Mm-hmm. And then mates of mine started watching WCW. One of my mates said, "You've got to watch WCW. They got this guy called Goldberg. He's amazing. And he's like 50-0 at the time, undefeated." And I'm like, "Dude, I don't think he'll be any better than anyone in WWF. They got to watch this Goldberg guy. He's amazing." So I went over to one of my mates' houses and watched this Goldberg guy. I think that he was against Disco Inferno. And when he speared Disco Inferno, he almost cut him in half. It was crazy. And I was hooked on Goldberg, and me and my 3 best mates were like the biggest Goldberg fans, and we'd book the pay-per-views, we'd watch the weekly shows, and, so WCW made me feel like a kid again for a few years. So that's how my love of pro wrestling. And when I got to do, Ultima Lucha, in the US for the El Rey Network and for Mark Burnett Productions, it was one of the highlights of my career to finally commentate a professional wrestling show on national, American television, and a big one at that. I loved it, every moment of it.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of Lucha. So you never necessarily were exposed to maybe your Memphis's Lance Russells, Mid-South's Boyd Pierce, Georgia Championships, Gordon Soley.
Australia, we were very limited. There was none of that on TV. I know it was a big deal in America, but I didn't know who Ric Flair was for years. I had no idea. And I had no idea how big Ric Flair was, or, how the reputation of like the 4 Horsemen, Arn Anderson, all these sort of guys that were NWA guys and all that, because we just never got it on television in Australia. It just didn't happen. We got WrestleMania.
Yeah.
And before that, in the 70s and the early 80s, and I was too young to watch it, we'd get Australian wrestling that had, quite a few American names came out.
Bill Dundee, superstar Bill Dundee, he went on to Memphis to become big.
Yeah, those old days, but I was too young for that. But we never got AWA and MWA and all the regional American stuff in Australia. So really for everyone my generation growing up then, it was WWF. And it wasn't until later that really when I later found out just how big the wrestling territories were in America, but it didn't really apply outside of America too much.
Well, yeah, and the whole cable packages, and that's really kind of a common theme. A lot of people, WWE and F's exposure was so much bigger than the early NWA. Turner Broadcasting and WCW kind of started changing that, and the AOL and all that. But yeah, the early on stuff, boy, man, I was just raised on that stuff. So I know it had to have been pretty surreal for you, when you actually had a chance to interview Hulk Hogan. Were you in his home? I believe you were in his house, weren't you?
Yes, that was great. To finally, I've interviewed a lot of people, and I'm not really ever often starstruck, to be honest with you. But I think Hogan was the first time, maybe actually one of the first times I got really starstruck. We were in his home, or I think it's his former home now in Clearwater, Florida, which at a time was one of the most expensive houses in the southern part of the USA. I mean, they built this. They built this from scratch. They didn't actually build it themselves. They lived on the property in the boathouse, I believe, while the house was being built, and it took a couple of years, maybe it took 3 years to build it. I remember Hogan telling me that the ceiling was 400-year-old imported French wood, and the place had its own private marina and had all these pools and all these rooms. It was just the most magnificent house I've ever seen. And he had it on the market because obviously he'd been divorced, so he was trying to sell it. it was on the market for, I guess it might have been like 14, 15 million at the time, which is a steal because the place is actually worth about 25, 30 million. It's crazy. Wow. So the only furniture left in the house were the 2 sofas that we were sitting on. So to interview Hogan there at that house and get to spend, not only the hour and a half the interview went for, but,
mind you, ladies and gentlemen, this man is so committed. He bleached his goatee, man.
Oh my God, never again.
Down with the blonde goatee.
The night before, I bought some bleach, and I thought, I'm going to go Hollywood Hulk Hogan. I'm always, when I do interviews, Jeffrey, I'm looking for an icebreaker.
Sure.
So something I can ask a guest straight off that will break the ice and just get them to chill with me and relax and in the mood where they want to open up. So I thought, what can I do with Hulk Hogan? The guy's heard everything. He's heard every question before. But I bet if this Aussie, dyes his beard and does the black stubble and does Hollywood Hulk Hogan style, it's just going to be a cool icebreaker. I almost burnt my face off trying to peroxide my own beard in my hotel room during 100-degree heat outside. But it worked because it was the first thing that Hogan spoke about during the interview. We had a laugh over it. It really set the tone.
It was beautiful because he gave you a tip on how to do it right, put a fan next to you, and he also let you know, my friend, you were on some gimmick infringement, as he said. He was not. That was so fantastic. But you also gave kudos. I'm sorry. You also gave kudos to superstar Billy Graham, whose gimmick he infringed. So he can't really talk too much smack about gimmick infringement.
Exactly. I was more going for Hollywood Hogan because Superstar Graham was before my time. Although Superstar Billy Graham did end up managing one of my favorite wrestlers who really flew under the radar a lot, the magnificent Don Morocco, who later became Superstar Don Morocco, and we'll kind of come out to the Jesus Christ Superstar theme. And I loved Don Morocco during that period. He was a beast.
Well, yeah, I guess let me ask you then. So you're Mount Rushmore of professional wrestlers, if you will, from the eras, from what all eras you've stretched. You know what I mean? From old school to now.
Think, well, you know what? We'll go. First name you're gonna have on there's gonna be Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan to me is gonna be first. Andre the Giant's gonna be on there. Stone Cold Steve Austin has to be on there. The Rock has to be on there, and then I would like to see Randy Macho Man Savage on there.
Macho Man.
I know that a lot of Americans are going to say Ric Flair should be on there. That's cool, but then once again, Ric Flair, for me, I know how legendary he is, but me recognizing who he actually was because, as I said, we weren't exposed to him in Australia, I really didn't understand the legendariness of Ric Flair early on. So he really didn't have that impact on me that I know he had on a lot of your listeners. So if I was going to go another name, I'll put Ric Flair on there as well because he deserves to be on there. But you're asking from my perspective, I would go those guys.
Nice. Very nice. Yeah, I always love chopping it up with you're the kind of good professional wrestling fan. Man, I mean, as a part of, some of the stuff that you have done, not just commentating, but you've also had a chance, like we've talked about, to interview really the who's who in The Voice versus. I mean, like I said, Dana White. I mean, you've really talked to a lot of people. It's funny. I was watching the Steven Seagal interview, and he just started out body language wise, and his arms were just crossed, and you kind of broke the ice with you knowing about who founded Aikido. I mean, just like you really kind of proved yourself as a knowledgeable person, and he kind of seemed to loosen up from that. Just talk about talking to some of those guys. What were some of the surprises and highlights, and who was kind of a jerk and affirmed the fact that you were a jerk, or who surprised you? What was it like talking to a lot of those guys?
The Steven Seagal experience was incredible from start to finish. I'll tell you about Seagal because he was the most intriguing character of all. Let me state that there are many people have many opinions on Seagal, on Hulk Hogan, on Dana White, on all these people that I've interviewed. But I can only, Jeffrey, ever judge someone by how they treat me, and I can't go on hearsay about how they might have treated someone else. So, for Steven Seagal and I got on like a house on fire. We got on really, really well. But he's a guy whose respect I had to earn. And first of all, he was the only guest ever that asked to see my questions, which is a big no-no when you're interviewing someone to never send you questions. But the only way to get Seagal was one of many ways we had to try and get him was to send my questions through. So I had to send my questions through, and there were a few questions he didn't like that he wanted me to take off. And he rang me the night before the interview, and he said, "Listen, I don't want to talk about judo. Gene LaBelle allegedly choking me out. It never happened. Gene LaBelle's full of BS. He's a crazy old man, and it never happened. But I'm sick of trying to defend myself. I don't want to talk about it, so take it out." And then he didn't want to talk about it.
Just to rewind, what are your thoughts on that? Because that story is of lore. Not only did he choke him out, he supposedly defecated himself. What are your thoughts on that? Is it true? What do you think?
Steven's a big guy, and he's a legitimate martial artist, a legitimate Aikido master. Gene LaBelle was a friggin' legend, super strong, awesome, could probably choke out an ox. I don't know, man.
Right.
I'm thinking Steven's adamant it didn't happen, but, how can you not trust what Gene LaBelle says? He'd have no reason to lie, but who knows? It's one of those things like, who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? It's like,
gotcha.
it's like Richard Gere with the gerbils. Who knows?
Yeah. Right, go ahead.
Seagal calls me the night before, and he didn't want to discuss his so-called black ops work with the CIA either. And he said to me, Michael, I did black ops work and undercover work for the CIA, but every time I talk about it, I get a call the next day from the CIA saying, Steven, you shouldn't be talking about this stuff. So he goes, I don't want to get in trouble. So anyway, he made me take those questions out too. But the thing was, on the phone, Steven pressed me with a lot of questions as to how much I knew, because I sold this interview trying to get it. It took me a year and a half to get it, on the fact that nobody that had ever interviewed him would know as much about martial arts, let alone as much about Aikido as I would. So when he rang me, he started quizzing me about Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, and about the martial arts and the founder of other martial arts and all this stuff. And I knew it, because I'd been editor of a martial arts magazine for 10 years. I'd been, calling martial arts and writing about it for 20 years. So I knew my stuff back to front. So I'd actually earned Steven's respect, because the Voice Versus episode was the only time Steven Seagal has ever done an interview that went for more than 10 minutes.
Right.
And the actual interview went for 90 plus minutes, but we strip it back to 52 minutes for television. So it was a mega interview, and a lot of it ended up on the cutting room floor because we couldn't fit it in. So anyway, we're filming in Scottsdale, Arizona, in the penthouse suite of this beautiful resort. And Seagal rocks up in this SUV, and we are told that the SUV has bulletproof windows, and the doors and the frame can sustain the force of an RPG, okay, a rocket-propelled grenade. And in the case of a chemical attack, the car can be hermetically sealed, so you are sealed inside, safe from a gas or chemical attack.
Wow.
So, this is my introduction to Steven Seagal.
Well, even one of your other interview subjects, Frank Dukes, who was the inspiration for Bloodsport and quite possibly the Ultimate Fighting Championship, there's a conversation to be had there that he can vouch for that this this man is licensed in not just your regular firearms. Like there's a reason why he's armed to the teeth.
And let me say that. So Seagal gets upstairs to our interview area, and he's big. Seagal's 6'5", and he's thick. He's a big guy. Not fat, he's just thick.
Yeah.
Thick guy, 6'5", big boy. And he gets in there, and he immediately puts on his director's hat. Now, mind you, if no one knows, to do a TV set like for the Voice Versus, takes like 3 or 4 hours for the crew to set up and light and rig and all that. Seagal comes in, and he's like, who's in charge here? And our EP Daryl, the late Daryl Ewald, comes over and says, Mr. Seagal, I'm in charge. I'm the EP. He goes, this won't work, Daryl. These lights are too high. These lights are too low. You've got to shadow my face, change this, change that. So our guys are going to change the whole set, because Seagal thought he was director of photography. Then the sound guy is miking us up, and he mics up Steven, and he comes over to me, and he goes, Voice. He goes, do you know what Steven's wearing? I go, yeah, dude, I can see him. He's wearing a black shirt, black pants. He goes, no, under his shirt, he's wearing a bulletproof vest. I go, what? He goes, yeah, under his shirt, Steven's got on a bulletproof vest. So that was weird. Then Steven had a bum bag, a fanny pack, and it's in shot. So Daryl goes to pick it up to move it. And as he picks it up, Steven goes, sir, be very, very careful. Do not drop that bag. There are many dangerous things in there that could kill us all. And Daryl comes over to him and he goes, Mikey, he's got like 5 handguns in his fanny pack.
Wow.
So, from Steven gave a great interview, but you said, the body language was just incredible. He's looking off camera a lot, and he's sniffing a lot, and very, very paranoid body language. But such a gripping, intriguing interview, because you don't know whether it's the truth, whether it's BS, but it's all just so spectacular. And if you haven't seen it, check it out on YouTube.
Yes.
It's worth watching. And the whole day, the whole experience with Steven was just, man, I could write a book on it. I might one day. It was great.
Well, we're gonna get to your book, my friend, but yeah, I mean, I commend you, man, because your cojones and the level of questions, like you're talking to Hulk Hogan and you're talking about the Sheik. He's like, is it true that the Sheik used to stand on his hand and do rails of cocaine? And what's he going to say? Yes, that's exactly what he. I mean,
I've always believed, Jeffrey, that when you're doing interviews, you've got to. You've got to humble yourself to your guest, okay? You can't overpower your guest, and you've got to respect that your guest is the star of the show. But also, B, it's your show. It's your interview. Take control of the interview. Take the interview where you want it to go.
Yes.
And if you see a nice tangent it can go on, be prepared to go on a tangent and get off page. And the only way you can do that is by listening to your guest. The art of the interview is the art of listening. Okay? Don't ask a question and immediately look at your notes and have the next question in mind and miss what your guest is saying, because in what they're saying, they might give you a little nugget you can branch off on. Yep. But you've got to ask some of the harder questions, and some of the questions they just don't answer. Like with Hogan, I asked him about, the blood, the cutting in WWF, which is a taboo subject that 99% of wrestlers will not tell you about, how they deliberately cut themselves.
Yeah, he seemed very hesitant at explaining his gigging. I mean, we all know it now, but he still had that old school in him where he was.
Until I got him to open up, and then he explained it. He's like, yeah, man, I used to hide my razor blade in my lip between my teeth, teeth and my lips. And he goes, sometimes I forget it was there. I go out drinking, I go out eating and partying, and the razor blade would still be there. So to get him to open up about that, to open up again about the Iron Sheik getting pulled over with, marijuana or cocaine in his car, to open up about, the Andre the Giant story and set the record straight on Andre's apparent, racist little tiff he had with Bad News Brown, and just to set the history straight was amazing. And, same when I interviewed Stone Cold Steve Austin, the way Stone Cold opened up and some of the stories he told, and I think he was relieved to finally get his chance to have the time frame to tell these stories. He turned around at the end and said, that's the best damn interview I've ever done in my life.
I heard him say that. And, I don't know, I'm just a geek and I pay attention to these things. Like, immediately, I thought it was awesome. You had the cooler of beer there. Or, the beer just sitting right there, and he's just like, I gotta go to the gym later, blah, blah, blah. But sure shit, and later on, he had a beer in his hand, which was just fantastic.
And that's what he knew. From that point, I really knew that he was really loose, really, he was enjoying himself. And again, the Stone Cold interview, it went for about 75, 80 minutes, and you only see 52 minutes of it on the final broadcast. But, man, I cannot speak highly enough about Stone Cold. I love that guy. He's just one of the most awesome human beings I've ever met, and just, he's amazing. You can, talking to him off air as well. We've chatted several times on the phone and just chewed the fat. You can see how he became such a star and so successful because his work ethic is just unbelievable. He grinds the fingers to the bone. He's willing to humble himself and learn off other people to improve himself. It really is inspirational, the way that Stone Cold dedicates himself to whatever he does.
Well, and again, check out all of these interviews, ladies and gentlemen, the voice versus. But you're right, Stone Cold, and you talk about humbling himself, his dedication to what he was doing, the part in the interview where he was talking about, I was basically living off tuna and potatoes. I ran out of tuna and I was just basically eating potatoes. I mean, you just don't see that kind of dedication to one's craft very often, and it's beyond commendable. And it's like you said, it's how he became a huge star.
999 out of 1,000 people would have quit, but the guy's living off potatoes, not even cooked potatoes. He's got a pocket knife and he's cutting raw potatoes to eat while he's on the road trying to make a name for himself. I mean, he really is just a great guy, and I can never say a bad word about him. He's awesome.
Yeah, and he definitely knows the business in and out. Before we hop off of the voice versus, another, like I said, individual you interviewed was Frank Dukes. If anybody doesn't know him, he's very old school, very tried and true martial artist, is the inspiration for the film Bloodsport, the Kumite and all that kind of backstory. There was a question you asked, my friend, and again, this was just like a testament to your cojones, and you were speaking about his possible Black Ops works as well, and you asked it. You're like, sir, have you ever killed somebody? And he said to you, and I'm curious how you took this response. It was, I don't want to answer that question. Not only do I don't want to answer it, he's like, it's not a civilized question. What did you take that to mean? Obviously didn't throw the interview off because he still was very open and emotional with you. What were your thoughts on his response to that question?
You see, I had read Frank Dukes' book, which not a lot of people have read. There was a book that he wrote that was published by HarperCollins in, I think, the early 1990s. So it was a major publisher, and it was a big hardback book And I'd read it from cover to cover, and it reads like a novel. It's meant to be his biography about his Black Ops CIA work, but it really reads like a Bourne novel. It's amazing if you can get a hold of it. It's very rare. So I'd read it. So I knew from reading that I believe in the book. Now, man, it's been years since I read it, but I believe in the book he'd said or alluded to the fact that he'd killed people, in his special ops work. So I came out flat out and asked it during the interview. Him not answering it, I believe was, his way of politely saying, yeah, I have, injured people, or maybe he has killed someone, but he didn't want to portray that sort of aspect about himself on national television. I can get that, but I thought it made for a more interesting answer, because like I said, if he'd said yes to it, it would have just gone on to the next question. But the fact that he said what he did has got someone like you talking about it.
Years later,
it's you after he says it. It's like, wow, did he or didn't he? What a cool answer. What's his body language? What's his tone? What's his movement?
Even the true or false when you asked him, are you still employed by the CIA? And he's just like, that's a good question. It was just like, yeah, it definitely deepened the intrigue for sure.
Right. So Frank was like Seagal. It was just an intriguing character to talk to. He's a guy who gets a lot of flack from people because people go, well, the Kumite was all make-believe and Bloodsport was make-believe. But hey, you got to remember, man, in the 1970s, sparring at any dojo you went to was Kumite style. It was full on. You beat the other guy to crap. And then they most of them didn't have jigsaw mats or polished floorboards. They were on concrete floors. And these guys were raw. It's like, okay, you fight him, you're sparring, go, and you just beat the crap out of each other. And so why would you not believe that they had tournaments in the 70s where it was called a Kumite, and a Kumite means, fight, and they just let them go at it like they do in the UFC these days, but pretty much just even with less rules than in the UFC. I mean, to me, it's totally believable. Given the time frame was in the 1970s or the early 1980s, whatever it was, of course, this stuff was happening all over the world. Man, it still happens today.
Yeah.
You go to a Muay Thai camp. Go to a Muay Thai camp in Thailand and go watch them spar. You know what? Even more, exactly. Go to Holland.
Yep.
Go ask Alistair Overeem or ask Bada Hari or Tyrone Spong or Gokhan Saki or Melvin Manoff what the kickboxing sparring is like in Holland. And they will tell you it is harder than being in a fight, because even though they're sparring friends and training partners, they go in there, they kill each other. So are you telling me you can't believe that this guy in the 70s was competing in a Kumite? Of course he was. And of course Hollywood dressed it up, okay, with the platform and the names of the styles and the traditional uniforms and all that. They dressed it up for Hollywood. But what it's based on is real. Okay, it's like, that'd be like watching Here Comes the Boom and saying, oh, well, that's not a real indication of a UFC fight. Of course they dressed up Here Comes the Boom. Of course they dress up Rocky Balboa's fights. It's Hollywood.
Right.
But the stuff it's based on is real. Yeah. So Frank Dukes did compete in full contact events. You can call them kumites. You can call them no holds barred. You just call it full contact events. It's what it was. For that day and age, I don't know why anyone would disbelieve him.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I haven't read that book, but as you said, you read it in 2 days, so it seems like it's a pretty fascinating read, and he just seems like a very fascinating guy. Like, he's done a little bit of everything, and he even spoke more forthrightly than I thought he would about his work with the United States government. But again, ladies and gentlemen, check out The Voice Versus. You can find most of those anywhere. Dana White, Tito Ortiz. He's got Joe Rogan as well, and you've also been on Joe Rogan's podcast as well. Moving on, before I let you go, my man, the world of mixed martial arts. Obviously, you announced for one, you're a huge fan. On this show, my first guest was our friend Pat Miletich, and I've interviewed him several times. Stephen Wonderboy, Boss, and I've asked, and around when I first interviewed Pat, I called it the McGregor effect, if you will, and its effect on the sport. And sure enough, since that's happened, he hasn't even defended his belt. He got one belt stripped. He went and fought boxing. Dan Henderson's fighting for the title. There's just nothing with the rankings, it seems like. And you have a lot of people jumping ship to Bellator. Not that it's all about UFC, but what do you see, because they are kind of the flagship brand, what do you see going on with the UFC and fighters jumping ship and stars going away? No more Ronda right now or Anderson, and they really have to rebuild stars. And on top of that, the McGregor effect. What are your thoughts on the brand on mixed martial arts right now, my friend?
I really think UFC is sort of in this I won't call it limbo period. they're in a period of change. All right, we'll go back and give it another professional wrestling comparison. I'll compare it to the time when, let's say, WWF had to get out of the Bret Hart, Diesel era of like WrestleMania 11.
Yes, dude. Same metaphor I've used. I've used the same thing where they had to rebuild Stone Cold and The Rock. Yeah.
Attitude Era, the Stone Cold era, the D-Generation X era.
Yep.
So those few years where Bret Hart took the torch, for a couple of years, he was the champion, and then Diesel held it briefly after that. That was sort of like a WWF going away from Hulk Hogan. The old Hulk Hogan, Hulkamania days were over, but they weren't at the Attitude Era, D-Generation X era, which would probably end up being bigger than Hulkamania. They were in between. So I see UFC in that same era at the moment, where the Ronda, Anderson days, GSP even days are sort of behind them now, and they're building all these new stars, guys we aren't too familiar with but are going to get there. You've seen people like Brian Ortega putting on a great performance on the weekend. So they're building new, exciting stars, but it's going to take them a couple of more years for these stars to come to fruition and star-level maturity. So that's really where I think UFC is at the moment. They're in that same era WWF was in when Hulkamania ended, and then, before Stone Cold and Attitude Era and D-Generation X began.
Well, and obviously there's always room to build new stars as we've seen, but what are your thoughts on the whole ranking system? And almost with wrestling, the belts are they change hands so much they almost don't mean anything. I mean, obviously it's different in mixed martial arts, but again, you're Dan Henderson fighting for the title. Again, this is a while ago, Chael Sonnen losing to Anderson and then fighting for John Jones for the title. I
think that anytime you fight for a title, you got to qualify for it. It's got to be, the title has to be sacred. For me growing up with WWF, that heavyweight championship was always just so sacred. Yeah. And, when they split it and they had like the world championship and the heavyweight championship, to me it made no sense. I like just one championship belt, one belt above all others that everyone aspires to. That's the pinnacle of sports entertainment. It's the same in mixed martial arts. I like one belt. I've never liked interims. I don't understand interims. I think they're silly. Having someone be an interim champion, it's ridiculous. Even Rob Whittaker. I mean, he's an Aussie. I love Rob. He's fantastic. But how are you champion now when you've never fought for the championship belt? Just put it down as a vacant title. When Ronda came to UFC and they gave her the championship belt after she came from Strikeforce, why? Right. Call it a vacant title and let her compete against whoever it was. I can't even remember. Let her compete for it and win the title. Interims are ridiculous. They water it down. They make it seem like the only important thing is a title. Whereas what they should focus on more is saying, hey, this fight is a title contention fight. If Chael Sonnen beats, I don't know, for argument's sake, Michael Bisping in this contest, whoever wins this one fights the champion. Okay? That's the way it should be. That's the way One Championship's doing it, and I like it. We're doing like, hey, you know what? Whoever wins this one gets a crack at the belt next time. And you put a lot of force behind the championship, not watering it down and not polluting it. And I think UFC needs to go back to making that belt something really, really sacred and more, and more of an issue about people qualifying for it. And the ranking system, it's a little flawed as well, and it might look good on TV or everything, but if it doesn't play out properly, what's even the point of having it? You got to use it. You can't have your number 10 guy fighting your number 1 guy for the championship when number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are also there and are willing to fight. Just because you can't negotiate with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, why should number 10 get the crack? Just some of it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and they're obviously going for, pay-per-view buys and, fan fights as opposed, and they're, I've talked to, Den Thomas, Tyron Woodley's trainer, and Amanda Nunes, Pat as well, Wonderboy as well. There has to be a balance. I don't mind some fan fights coming from that WWE background, but please stop compromising, the belt as it were. 'Cause like I said, it really takes an emphasis away a lot from the belt.
There's a lot of guys that a lot of us don't know that we're seeing on the UFC roster at the moment. But we've just got to be really patient. You see, UFC's got matchmaker Mick Maynard, and Mick Maynard is a genius when it comes to matchmaking. I think UFC signing him up, was a brilliant move. And this is all part of Mick's plan. I can see it, that he's bringing this talent that we've seen in, Legacy Fighting Alliance and CES and a lot of the smaller promotions, bringing them to UFC, putting them on TV slowly but surely, getting them built up and building their experience, and he's hoping they'll pay dividends in a couple of years' time. So like I said, we've got to have a bit of faith in someone like Mick Maynard that he knows what he's doing, and they're in that transition period, and in 2 years' time, we'll be talking about Brian Ortega as big a name as Nick Diaz, stuff like that.
Yeah, and I love that, honestly. I mean, I love that, to see that ebb and flow, the competition. I really miss, even going back to the Pride days, I wish you could still have something like that there. But, I don't want to keep you too much longer, man. I'll just kind of break this down. You obviously are a huge boxing fan. I'm going to run through this somewhat fast. MMA, you've been there. You've seen the who's who for quite a while now. Mount Rushmore, my friend, of the MMA world, not just UFC. Go back to Bruce Lee if you need to. Who's your Mount Rushmore?
Well, you know what?
And you can expand it a couple.
Okay.
Mount Rushmore's not a little bit.
I'm going to put Bruce Lee on there because for many people, he is the original exposure to mixed martial arts, especially in a movie like Enter the Dragon, where you see him, in the MMA style gloves, doing the arm bars and that on I think it was Sammo Hung's character, played by Sammo Hung. You see him using the mixed martial arts. So you got to put Bruce Lee on there. You got to put Muhammad Ali on there because Muhammad Ali was a lot of people's exposure simply to the fight game. And then when he fought Inoki, it really was a worldwide exposure, almost to what would almost qualify as one of the very first mixed martial arts matches.
Well, do you think that was a shoot? Full shoot?
No. Let me tell you a story here. A couple of years ago in Vegas, I'm hanging out with Michael Jai White. Michael Jai White, among many other roles, played the role of Mike Tyson on HBO's film Tyson. So I'm hanging out with Michael Jai White. We're walking through the Bellagio, and he sees this guy he knows, this old guy. Guy's name is, I'm going to get his last name wrong. It's Gene Kilroy. Ends up, this guy used to be Muhammad Ali's business manager. So he was like Ali's best mate. And, now he's like 80 years old or whatever, but he's a legend in Vegas, and I met him. Michael's talking to him. And so I say to him, hey, were you there when Ali fought Inoki at the Budokan? And he goes, let me tell you about that. He goes, not a lot of people know this. He goes, Ali's legs took so much punishment, that we had to ice his legs straight away out the back and do, I forgot what it was, Jeffrey, or something else they had to do to his legs. Actually, maybe they had to rush him to the hospital straight away. Or something or another. Either they had to get the doctors to him at the back straight away or take him to the hospital straight away, or Ali would have lost his leg or legs.
Whoa.
This is coming from the mouth of Ali's business manager. I swear to you. So I'd never heard that before. So if you're asking me if Ali versus Inoki was a work, it could not have been a work if Ali's legs genuinely took that much damage. Wow. So, again, I put Ali on that Mount Rushmore. And then we're going to get into the pioneer days. Obviously, first name has to be there, Hoist Gracie. Okay? I believe Randy Couture has to be there as well. These guys were game changers in the early days. Fedor Emelianenko, for me, needs to be there as well. A guy like Kazushi Sakuraba deserves to be there as well. He only just got inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame, and people a lot of the newbies don't understand just what a big deal and how awesome Sakuraba was in his day,
right.
And what influencing game changer he was.
Gracie killer.
The Gracie, and I think you got guys like Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz that really put UFC on their back during a day when it couldn't get sanctioned in every state, and really, helped to make it as big as it was, along with Forrest and Bonner as well. They deserve a place on your Mount Rushmore just for that Ultimate Fighter Season 1 finale that really launched UFC into the mainstream. So they're the guys that I'd sort of figure would be on a Mount Rushmore of MMA.
Nice. Yeah, that rounds out pretty close to mine. I'd have to throw in maybe an Anderson in there just because he was, such a beast. And, but, it's a very subjective thing. And so boxing, obviously you're a boxing fan as well. And that's, what are your thoughts too, man? The boxing game, give me your thoughts. Professional wrestling obviously is no more. The professional wrestling we knew as a kid, kayfabe, is no more. Is MMA the new professional wrestling? And what's your boxing Mount Rushmore going back? You can mix weights and everything.
I think MMA is the new professional wrestling for fans. I've seen a lot of fans both in the USA, going to UFC Expo and having attended Strikeforce events in the past, and throughout Asia, and and Dream and Dynamite, and now with One Championship, and seeing the merchandise they sell, the programs they sell, the way they market the fans, market the athletes to the fans as well, and do the fan interaction stuff, and make the fighters and the athletes seem larger than life, which is the way that you and I used to view Hogan and Rude and Warrior and Savage back in the day, you know. So I see this now at One Championship. I see us go to countries like Myanmar or countries like the Philippines, where mixed martial arts is still relatively new, and these guys are walking down the street and people are looking at them in awe because they've seen them on their television at night time, you know. Myanmar, where Aung San Suu is just mobbed and, you know, can pick up the phone and get a sit down with the first, you know, the whatever you call it, the president of Myanmar, you know. Just these are just huge pop culture figures, which I think is what we're seeing these athletes become now, pop culture figures in mixed martial arts, which was previously the vestige of pro wrestling. So I do agree with you that I think in a way, as far as a fan is concerned, you can follow mixed martial arts to a point now as you used to be able to follow WWF back in our days. As for a boxing Mount Rushmore, you know, you got to go people that I never saw, but you've got to go just because you know the history of them, like Sugar Ray Robinson.
There you go.
Rocky Marciano. You got to go those guys. You got to go Ali. You cannot not go Ali. You got to go. Man, there's so many names going through my head, but you don't want to list everyone.
No. Yeah, exactly.
You're trying to be very selective. I go Sugar Ray Leonard. You know, I go someone like probably Floyd Mayweather. You've got to put Floyd on there, of course. Maybe someone like Manny Pacquiao. I think Sweet Pea Pernell Whitaker was maybe one of the most talented boxers of all time, but maybe not deserving of a Mount Rushmore. But, you know, you talk about talent and you list so many names throughout history. You know, Tyson, obviously, for what he did to boxing with his pay-per-view figures and the popularity, has to go on a Mount Rushmore. But there's so many talented people throughout history, like, you know, George Foreman and Joe Frazier and Ken Norton, Sweet Pea Pernell Whitaker and Oscar De La Hoya and Chavez, and then you go down the line to Klitschko brothers and the modern day guys like, you know, GGG and Canelo and of course Lomachenko.
My goodness.
I commentated that guy to gold in Beijing. You know, I commentated his first ever big thing he did, and I knew there and then that he was going to be the next big star. And now we're seeing it. 9 years later? You know, there's so many great names in boxing out there in the world. That said, not as many big profile names as there were 15, 20 years ago, where you could list off easily. You could walk down the street and the average man could probably back then, all right, list at least 5 to 10 boxers that he knew off the top of his head that were current.
Yeah. Oh, like you just said, like, you know, Leonard. I mean, obviously it was a Leonard, Hearns, Hagler, and even in the heavyweights, it was multiple weight divisions. And like you said, and that's so true. Same with UFC and mixed martial arts, I see, and it's changing. But the stars, I mean, back in the day, man, it was. It's not a matter of even kayfabe being removed with boxing. Boxing's just changed, but I mean, you know what I mean. Boxing's still boxing, but we just don't see those stars coming up in different divisions like that.
Now I'm talking the average man on the street. The average man on the street. If you ask him the question, say, name me 5 current active boxers. Okay, and not a boxer his family might know or some local boxer with solid name. I'm saying good quality profile boxers. He's going to say Mayweather straight up. He's going to say Pacquiao straight up. Okay? Man on the street will say it. Then, I believe, he starts to struggle. Yeah. Man on the street's not going to know who Joshua is. Not going to know who Parker is. Man on the street's not going to know who Golovkin is. Not going to know who Canelo is. Not going to know who Lomachenko is. They just don't know. They won't know.
Even the heavyweights. I mean, who is the heavyweight champion right now? That's ridiculous.
Right. You know, they're not going to know Parker from Joshua, from the New Zealand guy to Anthony Joshua to Deontay Wilder. They're not going to know these names. So that's what I'm saying is that big names aren't there anymore. Yeah. And boxing also finds itself in a state where it needs to reestablish itself. You know, there's a difference between famous and pop culture famous. And what's his name? David Meltzer. Mm-hmm. Recently, I saw a tweet that he did arguing with people because Meltzer listed Hogan. I'm sort of paraphrasing here a bit, but I believe he listed Hogan, The Rock, as like wrestlers that were pop culture stars, and didn't rate Ric Flair as a pop culture star. And people started to bag him out and debate and saying, how do you not put Ric Flair there? Ric Flair's so famous. And I agree with Meltzer. Yeah, Ric Flair's mega famous, but he's not pop culture famous.
It's almost what you just explained earlier as to why you didn't know who he was for the longest.
Okay, again, if you go to the average person on the street, average person, okay, if I'm walking down, I'll even do it in Vegas. I'll walk down the strip in Vegas and I'll ask 100 people, do you know Hulk Hogan? I guarantee you 99 out of 100, possibly 100 out of 100 will say yes.
Yeah.
If I say, do you know who Ric Flair is? I'll say out of 100, depending if it's an older, younger, but we're mixing up the demographic, I'll say maybe 65 to 70 are going to know Ric Flair. Okay? If you say who's The Rock, 100%, 99, 100% are going to know who The Rock is. There's a difference. Now, I'm not saying Flair's not famous because even 75 out of 100 makes you bloody famous.
Right.
Okay? But he's not transcended to pop culture famous, which someone like Hogan, which someone like The Rock has.
He's not, he's not Coca-Cola, that's for sure.
No, he's not Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
He's not. Exactly. He's not. So, and again, I always put these debates down to man in the street. Would the man in the street know who this person is? Right. They don't know who Golovkin is. They don't know who Canelo is. They don't know who Lomachenko is. Are those guys freaking awesome? Yes. Are they popular? Yes. Are they man in the street popular? No. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, we could get into like why that is different, like Sugar Ray Leonard. I mean, he was like one of the golden boys coming off the Olympics. There was so much stuff that propelled him in boxing at that time. But yeah, very, very fascinating.
But also, Jeff, back then, remember, boxing was treated in the mainstream a lot better. You'd see guys like Sugar Ray in movie parts, in mainstream TV roles, doing mainstream commercials, doing appearances, red carpets. You'd see them on talk shows back in the day. Now, you don't see any of these guys on talk shows or doing red carpets at awards nights or anything like that. You just don't see it. They're not embraced like they used to be 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah, the game has definitely changed. And I'm going to add two more things I'm going to let you slide, and this is an easy segue into one of these last questions. What role do you feel, in your opinion, sir, on concussions and CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy? What do you feel that role in the PR, the negative PR that's played on combat sports, football, etc., but particularly how it's affecting boxing and MMA?
I think a lot, but I think it's also very misunderstood. Our sport, and when I say our sport, I'll umbrella all combat sports, but I'll specifically throw an umbrella over mixed martial arts, is very misunderstood. When I tell people what I do for a job, people go, what do you do? And I'm a sports broadcaster, what sport? And I'll say mixed martial arts, or I'll just say UFC because most people know it as UFC,
Right.
And they go, ooh, too violent for me. I go, what do you watch? What sports do you like? Oh, I like football, Aussie rules football. All right. Now, if you've never seen Aussie rules football, you're allowed to do this. You can take a 20-meter run-up at full blast towards a guy whose back is turned to you. This guy doesn't know you're running at him from behind. You can then leap onto his back, dig your knee into his spine, so you climb on him with your knee dug into his spine and catch the ball. Okay? Jeez. You can also run up and down the field with no padding. There's no padding. The only padding you have is a mouth guard. Okay? And you can grab a guy and wrench tackle him to the ground, slam him down onto the ground. Okay? You can do these things in Australian rules football. Much, much, much more violent and impactful and injury-prone sport than mixed martial arts, where they're professionals, where they're trained to defend against all these sorts of attacks, and they can see the attacks, but mixed martial arts is perceived as the more dangerous sport. Same with rugby. Rugby can be so dangerous, the guys have to wear masking tape on their ears to hold their ears on their head so they get ripped off. Okay? But mainstream acceptance. But people will go, ooh, mixed martial arts, UFC, too violent for me. Oh, that's that no rules stuff, right? No, they're friggin'
exactly. Ignorance is bliss. You're right.
They can do anything, right? They can do anything. No, they can't do anything.
Yeah.
But it's people not educated, not knowing. And that stems from the early days where it was, marketed as no holds barred, anything goes, age, and it's just the way it is. You either try and explain it to everyone, or you just go, all right. No worries.
Well, yeah, you definitely.
I never try and force it on anyone. Everyone has their own likings, and each to their own.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you've been around way more than I have. I mean, these are some of the most highly trained, most disciplined people in the world. And if anybody knows anything about martial arts, true martial artists, that's not the last thing they are. Is I mean, of course you have you were talking to Steven Seagal, you were distinguishing between martial arts and fighters. You have fighters out there, you got your knuckleheads, but most of your top level martial artists are some of the most zen, kickback, chill people you could ever meet.
Of course, and it's. I would say probably in the UFC, I'd say the ratio is a little less. It's probably still most of them are martial artists, but the ratio might be 60-40. Right. Somewhere like one championship where you're digging into that Asian martial arts base, the percentage is way up there. It's like 99-1 on It's so they're so focused on the respect factor. There's no trash talking allowed. There's no throwing bottles, throwing Monster Energy drinks. There's no pushing and shoving. There's no walking around with hoodies on and dark glasses with your earplugs in and the brooding characters. Everyone's instilled a martial arts Budo spirit into them, which I really like, because I think that's what the sport is really about. And I'm a little disappointed that a lot of the UFC stuff and the Bellator stuff has had to go the way of trash talking, very obvious, tacky trash talking from people who don't know how to trash talk. It looks bad. It looks tacky.
So interesting. I mean, I find that interesting, and I obviously respect that. So you don't feel there's any kind of role? I mean, you look at like your old school Mr. International Shoney Carter. I mean, it's kind of theatrical. I mean, did you feel there's any kind of role in that element, if you will, McGregor effect?
If you know how to do it and you know how to sell it, like Charles Sonnen knows how to do it, knows how to sell it, fits in with his persona. Nick Diaz, I may not necessarily like the persona of Nick Diaz. They're always getting high, flipping the finger, F you, don't give an F about anyone else but himself type of thing. But that makes his character. That's him. That's Nick. Right. So it works for him. Okay? The trash talking I thought that Joanna did before her fight with Rose. It's not her. It doesn't suit her. It's not her character. You come off looking like an idiot.
So, and especially when you get the result like she got, that just definitely.
So it depends who's doing it. I'm not a huge fan of guys just doing it just because I think that's what it takes to sell pay-per-views. And if that's what sells TV, what sort of market are we catering for? What sort of brain dead, beer swilling idiots are we marketing this sport to? On one hand, we'll go out there and try and petition the sport to major networks, saying it's a very safe sport, it's a very popular sport, these are well-respected athletes. Okay, we're trying to get the contracts from the likes of Fox Sports and that. But on the other hand, we'll do press conferences, we'll let them talk trash and push and shove and hit each other. I mean, you're contradicting yourself. Really? What sort of market do you want to appeal to? It's a whole nother point of discussion we can do.
Well, there seems to be so many like mixed signals. You see your Connor who's gone and made millions and hundreds of millions, doing what he did based off of basically, not that he didn't back it up, but he's got so much that element to his thing. But again, the backing it up really helps. But all right, my man. Well, check this out. Before I let you slide, we talked about this when I was when you were on our show with UFC Hall of Famer Pat Miletich, the Conspiracy Farm. I know. Shout out any social networking stuff where we can track you down, as well as your book. And tell me a little bit about your book before I let you go. Know Thyself, man. Just break that off for me if you don't mind, and where the impetus was for that.
Yeah. So Pat Miletich and I both Freemasons, and we were both been masters of the lodge, which means we were in charge of our respective lodge. Mine was in Las Vegas last year, and Pat's was in Bettendorf, Iowa. And I wrote the book Know Thyself because over my years of being a Freemason, Freemasonry is a system of self-improvement. It's like doing martial arts or yoga or higher education, doing extracurricular schooling, going to the gym, meditation. People are always looking for avenues to improve themselves and improve themselves as a person. And Freemasonry is another avenue, a time-tested and tried and true avenue to improve yourself. And all these symbols that we use in Freemasonry, these important lessons we teach, I thought, well, these lessons should be out there for everyone to be able to learn, not just behind the closed doors of Freemasonry. So I wrote the book and put the life lessons into there, and the feedback has been outstanding, and it reached the bestsellers list on Amazon, and it's still selling very, very well. So if anyone wants to check it out, go to Amazon.com, type Know Thyself. using the symbols of Freemasonry to improve your life. It's something I'm very passionate about, and I'm getting back into my Freemasonry now that I'm resettled in Australia as well. And if anyone's interested, feel free to drop me a line on social media, or drop Pat Milicic a line on social media, and we're happily to discuss Freemasonry and its benefits. And if anyone ever wants to join, we can steer you in the right direction.
And where can we find that social media for you, sir? Twitter? What's your...
Yeah, Twitter's the best one. Just add me on Twitter at Schiavello Voice, and message me on Twitter. Follow me on there. On Facebook, it's Michael Schiavello MMA. Under that one on Facebook now. And, mate, I've got to say, Jeff, it has been an absolute pleasure to finally sit down with you and speak to you and have this chat, mate. It's great, and I look forward to coming back on in the future, buddy.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for your time. Obviously, don't hang up quite yet because I want to ask you something off air, but thank you. I know you're in Australia making some time adjustments, and a lot of us miss you here, man. Obviously, our boy Pat Milicic. Anything you want to say to our brother from another mother?
No, I'm not going to say anything to him. I miss him so much. I want you to wrap your arms around him, give him a big kiss from me, and say that's from Schiavello.
I will do that, man. Like I said, I just had to move back down here to St. Louis and left him, and we're not going anywhere because we got a nice little tag team going. But again, thank you so much, Michael, and continued success and one championship, ladies and gentlemen. They are killing it, man. Over 1 billion homes in 128 countries. That's nothing to sneeze at. Again, Mr. Michael Schiavello has joined us today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Peace, love. There will be more.